What's going on?
It's the end of the year.
That's true.
I was about to break out into a Christmas jingle, but then
Yeah, you didn't
it
really
wasn't.
have. It didn't seem like you had a
Didn't
very
really
strong
go
one on
there.
on
I didn't have
deck.
one on hand, you know.
That's okay.
Yeah, we're here. Hi, Chad.
Hi.
It's the end of the year, our last episode. It's the
Yes,
very end.
this is the end of the year recap. Almost like
Woo!
we can call it the end of season 1.
Yeah.
Solid 6-month run for the first, I would say, season,
Mhm.
starting with Alice in Wonderland, and
Wow.
now we're doing our end of the year recap.
I know. It wasn't that long ago, but it feels like we've covered a lot of ground since
Yeah,
then, which
absolutely.
has been fun. And the podcast has grown and evolved, and we've done more Val Chad episodes. So it
Mhm.
only feels right to end with one as well. if you look
Absolutely.
back.
Yeah,
Look
I mean,
back.
we kind of did a little bit of a soft recap on our own, and we weren't in the studio, and then we were like, no, we got to be in the studio because it's just a different vibe.
Feels better. It feels better. And there's a lot to talk about, I think.
Yeah.
We've
yeah.
talked about, I feel like our Val Chat episodes so far have been little mini check ins about what's going on throughout the year. But it's always fun to kind of look back and be like, okay, what were the actual big takeaways from the year, big artists, big moments,
hmm
and then hear a little bit about what we're looking forward to. Because I do feel like, especially you, have many good kind of like sights set on artists that are going to do big things next year.
Mm.
And yeah, we always have a good time talking about like the trends and things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've listened to more music on volume than I have in past years, but I haven't spent as much time with music, if that makes sense.
Yeah, which I feel like was relevant from our conversation with A-Track, right?
Yeah, I think that I do echo a lot of like what he was saying with how I know for me personally, and we'll get into the Spotify Wrapped portion or just kind of like our music recap of the year, but definitely a lot more like vibes with my music listening and just like stuff in the background.
Yeah.
And it happens. Like I also feel like it comes in waves. Like there's times where I'm much more invested in like the
Yeah.
album of the moment or a playlist of new stuff or whatever. Did you have a similar experience at all?
I feel like I did. And as you're saying that, I'm almost curious to know whether you think that's a symptom of where you're at personally in life, or if you feel like it's more a symptom of just the music scene overall, because I do feel similarly. And especially thinking back this year on like what were the big music moments of like songs or albums that came out. I think it's just harder now because there's so much music that comes out that I
Mm-hmm.
feel like it takes a lot of effort to like find and dig for music. And I do feel like probably this year I didn't put as much effort into it as I could. And maybe that's like a resolution for the coming year. But I feel like because of that, when I did find something, I really spent more time with just that, which maybe like made my scope of music feel smaller at the end of the year. Because I agree, like we've talked a little bit about Spotify Wrapped and all that, where like when I got my Spotify Wrapped back, I was like, oh, like I was really the pattern of my listening this year was like finding one thing and just like really revisiting it over and over again. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I think that is also not abnormal
yeah.
listening, and I kind of wanted to start by talking about this article that was interesting. If we're going to talk about a 2023 recap,
Tell us more.
Ramon sent me this one. It's from a writer named Sean Reynaldo, I
Mm-hmm.
believe, coming out of the UK, and it said, "Not a great year for dance music."
Mm.
AKA having spent 2023 doubling down on the ridiculousness of 2022, the genre currently sits in a rather uninspiring place.
Wow, that's
So,
a hot take.
yeah, I mean, we talked a lot this year about there being a renaissance, and I think one of the things about a renaissance in dance music, renaissance literally meaning rebirth, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe going back and market correcting like what dance music was this year, because by all accounts, we're having the most successful year in dance music history when it comes to global revenue, with a lot of artists that we're seeing do well, festivals and tours smashing. But then on the other hand, there's like a lot of people who are kind of struggling or having a little bit more difficulty. And that's by sheer volume, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the overall growth has been amazing. But the argument in this article, and it's probably through this like UK lens where it's like not as American as we are commercial and we're
Yeah.
into the selling of things, but we're seeing trends overall in dance music where it's gotten a lot more of a rehash of old trends, songs that everyone knew in the past, 90s stuff coming back.
Samples. Yeah.
Yeah. And the argument was that 2022 kind of started this trend in the post-pandemic world and that 2023 kind of continued it, so that it's kind of blended together, that 2022 and 23 are kind of this kind of, I don't know, this amalgamous mush of nonsense,
Mm.
where things are like people are more interested in dance music than ever, but there's less things that you're taking away that are memorable and like inspiring.
Yeah.
Have you felt that at all? I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I think it was an interesting article, because I think in a way both things can be true at once. Because I feel like remember when we had our conversation about the Renaissance and feeling like there was this new and excited energy about dance music, which I think is technically true because I do think that right now, as we look back of the waves of dance music, like dance music gets really popular as far as like mainstream popularity goes, and then it'll kind of go away for a while. And like maybe something like hip hop or rock will kind of take over as far as mainstream commercial music popularity.
yeah,
And I do actually feel like dance music is in a really popular peak right now. Like you look across some of the big commercial names, like John Summit just sold out a big stadium show here in LA. And like that doesn't happen all the time. Like that's because people are really interested in his brand and like marketing and able to connect whether or not it's on a deeper level with like house music that he's putting out there. And that is exciting in a way because it's like you're probably seeing more ticket sales than before. You're seeing more people talk about it and get excited about these kind of shows. And that does have a trickle effect down into other parts of music. But at the same time, I do think that for people like us and other fans of dance music who spend more time in the space, we can look at some of the things that are going on the surface and be like, it is kind of silly. It is kind of like surface level, the samples that we see all the time, the remakes of songs that aren't even really that old and they kind of sound like the old song, but it's like maybe got like a house beat on it now. You're like, that's not like a deep moment for dance music, but it's popular, it'll be on the radio, so, like, more people are experiencing it and getting exposed to it. So, like, I do think both things can be true at once, and I do feel like the pro of it is that more people are being exposed to it, and therefore, we have the opportunity for those people to then become, like, deeper fans. But at the same time, that's also the con, is, like, there's just people out there who are just there for the party, just there for the moment, and, like, those people aren't gonna stay necessarily, and that's brings its own kind of, like, weirdness and annoyance sometimes, but, like, I think that's where we're at, honestly, this year.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a good point, and I think one of the things that the article that Sean had written in this article was that it feels like the underground is less exist existent
Mm.
in at least in the UK, in this person's argument, that
Mm.
some of these clubs that used to have like a very cultural focused um reputation and booking
Yeah.
it's shifted more to like names and trends and things that are
Having a
gonna like,
moment or something
yeah.
like that,
And the
yeah.
fact that the boiler room aesthetic has become
Mhm.
placed on the mainstream, it almost makes like what I think boiler room is still underground or still leading in that category of like putting on, fringe artists and people
Yeah.
on the edge and really focusing on, you know, the integrity of the culture. But, for up and coming promoters, I think a lot of them feel like they need to go a little bit more into gimmicks and themes and,
Yeah.
I actually do see a lot of renegades. So I think in the United States, like there are a lot of promoters that are trying to uphold sort of like an underground culture and do it on their own terms. And I think that's great. So in that way, I don't think the writer was saying that it didn't exist. It
Yeah.
was just like I'm not seeing it as much. I hope it exists. I want to say that it's out there. And
Yeah.
I'm basically saying that at least here I've seen on the West Coast and parts of the United States, there is a good underground culture. However, on the whole, we've seen even like people just saying rave straight up like
Mm.
to describe things. And it's so interesting because that used to be the most taboo thing you could say. Like you almost wouldn't want to say rave because
Mm-hmm.
you're basically compromising the coolness or integrity of your event. That was the thought process, I think, in the
Right.
2010s,
Yeah.
which is like, this ain't a rave. Gary Richards basically at heart was like, we don't want you to bring glow sticks or candy. They basically outlawed it at LA Historic Park because there was a stigma associated with raves and the danger and the drug use and the shenanigans.
Yeah.
And they were like, we don't want rave. This is like a electronic music festival. This is a music festival. We don't want your raves.
Mm-hmm.
Leave your glow sticks at the door. But it's interesting how it's just like not like that anymore. Now it's like, this is a rave.
Yeah.
There's gonna be like all the things that come with it, and the mainstream is buying into it. Hollywood Boulevard can have a rave now, and
Yeah.
and things like that.
Well, I do think probably the definition of rave has also changed quite a bit because I agree that, like, I remember very clearly when people would say rave and you would think, like, okay, it's a kid covered in candy with like silly glow sticks in their hand and like maybe they have a pacifier in their mouth. And you're like, that's what a rave is. Whereas now I feel like a rave actually probably to most like mainstream folks is like you're in Tulum, you've got your sunglasses on, you're listening to like kind music and you're like going around like this, like that's maybe a
Really,
rave now.
I actually don't think. I feel like a
Really
rave is just like a at this point like just like a banging party.
interesting.
Because
Okay.
like
Yeah.
Kanye West, I wish I didn't have to say his name, but he and Ty Dolla Sign
Yeah.
are releasing an album called Vultures, and they have been throwing these like pop up
Raves.
raves.
I did see the word
So it's
rave
like
specifically.
I think that word is being kind of co-opted or taken back as
Mm,
like this is gonna be a banger. This is gonna be like a rager,
interesting.
and I
Yeah.
think rave is like a really interesting way for people to create interest,
Hmm.
right? Like you don't want to say party, you don't really want to say like I don't know, like I just think that rave is a way of like, ooh, it's a rave.
Hmm.
Like I'm like scrolling through and I see that there's a rave happening,
Yeah.
And in any certain way, like this language and the imagery will just get exhausted at some point. But right now we're in like a raves are at a premium type vibe, or like they're having it's a rave moment right now.
Interesting. So I guess with all that being said, do you feel like I was going to ask you a question about what we hope to kind of leave behind in 2023 and what we hope to see maybe more of in 2024. How do you feel about that specifically? Do you want us to leave that behind and maybe like redefine what we see a rave as, or do you think we're going to see even more of that in 2024?
Well, I mean, the rave thing has been good. I think that the growth of interest in dance music in the short term has been really good for anyone who works in the space because you just have more people to
Yeah.
draw from and to appeal to.
Hmm.
However, I do think that there's like certain etiquette and there's certain awareness and
Yeah.
engagement that is not always present.
Yep.
And I think that there's some long time people and people who have this idea of plur and have
Mhm.
this idea of like community that come to some shows,
Yeah.
maybe some of our shows, maybe some of like shows that they have been around for a while and then they come back later because they want to just like see a certain artist and they're like, "Oh my god, this crowd is
The vibe has
weird." Yeah,
changed.
it's
Yeah.
changed.
Hmm.
And I don't know, like I almost feel like we can't have it all, right? Like we want
Yeah.
everyone. See, it's like, do you want people to work and like be able to survive and like tour and have your headline show and do stuff,
Hmm.
or do you want to just do art and culture on your own terms and yeah, maybe only 40 to 50 people show up because you're doing your thing.
Yeah, and I think that kind of relates to something you were saying before too about how you were explaining that, the underground culture, things are still there, but it feels maybe overshadowed a little bit by other things that are getting more attention that are maybe like big moments that are like trying to get the viral moment or whatever. And I think that has a lot to do with like economically this year. I think it's still kind of hard, right? It's like we're still in that phase of like post COVID. It's like very expensive to throw good shows, and I think the players that are like essential for the underground while they are probably like hopefully always going to be a mainstay and like they know what they're doing, it's like things have gotten tough for like those folks who are not necessarily like the commercial ones. So I think I agree with what you're saying in that like we can't have it all. Right now we're in a moment of like big mainstream and like things are sometimes like a little over the top and a little silly, but I actually think that hopefully what that means is maybe this coming year will be a little step down from that where we'll be able to balance out a little bit. Maybe we won't be like covered in radio samples anymore, which honestly is probably a good thing, but then maybe we'll be able to focus more on like, okay, we might have like less people, but more dedicated people who are going out to the shows that are really good shows, who bring on good talent, focusing on like new and upcoming artists that are like worth our time,
Mm.
building them up a little bit more. But I don't know, it could also take longer than 1 year. So I think we'll start to see a little bit of that, but who
Yeah,
knows?
totally. I do sincerely hope, just for the strength of the ecosystem, that there are less. This is a trend that we can leave behind.
Mm,
Less themed parties, less secret lineups,
okay.
more in LA especially,
Mm,
and I even say this for Brownies Lemonade, you know, would love to have more showcases of up and coming artists, more artist development,
mm-hmm.
more attention being paid to the music, not the vibes, more
Mm,
attention being paid to the like individual songs and the understanding of like what constitutes a good set instead of like a whoop whoop
yeah.
when there's a four on the floor house drop.
Mm.
Like I think that yes, the gateway was open to the first timers who came out of COVID having never gone to these things.
Might be their first rave ever.
Totally.
Yeah.
Let's give them
Mhm.
some time to get acquainted.
Yeah.
Now
Yes.
you can buy tickets off of like genuine interest in going to see a really good show rather than your whole group of friends is going because it's a rave.
Mm.
And I
Mhm.
think, look, again, you can't have it both ways, but I do think we can start to support artists more because like I've said before, like yes, it's great that these music festivals are selling out without a lineup, but that like some of them, that means that no one is going for the lineup.
Mm. Yeah.
If the
I see what you're saying for
if the
sure.
festival is selling out before a lineup is dropped, that means that the
Vibe.
consumer cares more about the experience and the name of the event
Mm.
rather than the artists. And like because you should challenge the institution to be like, this lineup doesn't hold up to my expectations.
Which I feel like we've seen a lot of actually, probably more and more so now with those kind of major festivals that maybe typically would sell out is like actually I think when the lineup comes out now people are slightly disappointed sometimes
Hmm.
and they're like, "Oh wait, like maybe they were buying into like the trust of the curation previously, but now it's like why are we, even on the industry side, let's focus on the lineup and like let's deliver like a really good lineup of like maybe they're not going to be all the like Skrillexes or like, the big ticket like for sure they would have sold the tickets anyways, but maybe like, experiment a little.
Well, I think I do think that the discourse is strong with like people talking about like I went to EDC and I didn't expect that I was going to be at this one stage and
Yeah.
oh my god, it was
Mhm.
awesome. And I walked away and like this particular artist who I'd never heard about is now someone I have my eye on and I want to
Yeah.
go see their
Which is
show.
kind of the best.
And that
Yeah.
does happen a lot.
Yeah.
I have to give credit where credit is due. And I got to give credit to Insomniac for the headliner is you model. It does work
Yeah.
for people who just want to go and like just like they want to go discover stuff or they want to have an experience. And I think that's an honest means to then like maybe like I think the theming at the Insomniac events is really solid
Mm.
and the experiential and like they have a really good sense of like people are going to come here, maybe your everyday people, but they're going to
Yeah.
walk away with something, and
Yeah.
I think that's good for the industry as a whole. But I would like to see it kind of come back a little bit more for the artists as well,
Yeah.
um, in their individual spaces.
Yeah. Well, speaking of artists, I would love to know who were the main takeaways for you from this past year of people that you maybe you either discovered them or saw them really like come into themselves this past year and who you think is going to be having a big year in 2024.
That's a great question. I mentioned that a lot of the I think a lot of the really cool cutting edge stuff and the really interesting stuff for me is coming out of the UK.
Mm, mhm.
Um, it's it's definitely I'm not saying anything profound by saying that like, breaks and drum and bass and a lot of this like UK garage stuff and the
Hmm.
deeper dubstep stuff is really the coolest stuff right now. And
Having a moment for
yeah,
sure.
and we saw it permeate a little bit more into the wider dance music culture in America this year
Yes. Yeah.
and into pop music and like other spaces like
K-pop,
K-pop,
New Jeans,
New
shout out.
Jeans, and yeah, it was cool. It reminded me of like the late '90s, early 2000s when some of that stuff you hear like Daniel Bedingfield and
Yes.
like
That's
Dirty
exactly what I was
Vegas on the
thinking of.
radio, and you're like,
You're like,
what?
what's happening?
Where's Kelly Clarkson or whatever. But I think, yeah, I think like Puri and Tommy, really cool group it's a duo. She's a singer songwriter and he is Tommy's a producer.
Hmm.
Making like really cool drum and bass kind of stuff, really fun, and just Kush really introduced me to them late last year, but I saw and heard a lot more amazing stuff from them this year. Even heard them at the gym recently, which is like if your music's getting played at Planet Fitness, then I think
Yeah.
that it's starting to hit.
That's the world we live in now. I think Planet Fitness is down for drum and bass. That's the commercial mainstream world we're in right now, to be honest.
Absolutely.
It's a good analogy that captures it really well.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
also an artist that had been around for a minute that I had mentioned. I used to follow him back in the day when he was making totally different music, but Salute out of the UK
Mm.
having a really good year.
Hmm.
I know you saw Salute at Portola.
Yeah, I mean he was definitely one that was on my list as far as like moments and artists that I recall from this past year being like, "Oh, like something exciting is happening here." I think him and Portola specifically, there were 2 days of Portola, and Salute was an opener on one day, and the other opener was Azeka, who has more of like a darker house meets techno kind of sound. Both of them started playing at like 2 p.m. and by like 2:15 had a really solid crowd at both of their sets, and I think that that's a great sign that they're doing something right. People are excited about the music that they're making, and I'm sure that they're going to continue releasing really good music into 2024.
Yeah.
So,
I think that music's going to continue. Like drum and bass is going to be one of the top genres in the United States
mhm,
next year. I think
for
that's one thing
sure.
I could say.
Yeah.
Chase and Status just sold out the Palladium in like 2 hours.
Yeah.
They had one of the biggest years out of any dance music act, which is it goes to
Which
show
is
you that music
crazy.
doesn't exist in a linear chronology anymore
Yeah, because 'cause they've been
because
around for a long time.
forever. And when an artist that's been around for 15, 20 years can have their strongest year ever now,
Yeah.
it goes to show you that the tools here at your disposal can benefit anyone. Like,
Mhm.
if we're gonna talk about, let's talk about like best sets or best shows of the year.
Mm.
Chase and Status Boiler Room, I think for a lot of people has to be top of the list, near the top.
Yeah.
Just the way that like the clips from that set, a la Fred again, but just shows you the sheer power of the optics of Boiler Room.
Mhm.
Just like we had Chase and Status play DNBNL last year, and like it was a good set, but it wasn't something that like I don't think I don't know if like I walked away thinking like, oh, this like they're gonna have this like huge cultural,
Right.
you know,
Moment.
paradigm shift for
Yeah.
them. But they're just like pros,
Mhm.
who just nail it. And then this thing happens and it coincides with Badadan, which is like one of the biggest songs of the year, and it's just like this perfect just cocktail of hype and interest and
Yeah. People love the fast right now too.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it's really cool. I think
Yeah.
it's just really cool to see that. What was something like for show wise that you saw or that kind of caught your attention?
God, I feel like there actually were quite a few. I mean, we already talked about Portola, so I won't like, waste too much more time talking about it, but I do feel like that was a good moment for because we've been sitting in this era of people being into house and darker sounds for a little bit on a more commercial level than I think ever before. So I think Portola this year felt like a really good example of people maybe like the trickle down effect. 'Cause I do feel like we've hit the peak of that now. I don't feel like techno is going to be as big as it was this past year and this coming year. I think now we'll probably see like the tail end of like faster music, drum and bass for sure. I think we'll maybe have that big like era. But it felt like now the people that love the music and like were willing to dig a little deeper were there and
Mm.
like paying attention to the new artists that we just mentioned. And also at the same time, like I do think it was a good year for kind of like throwback artists having a new moment. Because same thing at Portola, Skrillex was one of the headliners, and he played a very throwback Skrillex set. That it did include a lot of his new music, but it just felt like for some reason it was like the right moment for him to do that again. And I know you had a really good moment with Skrillex earlier this year as well, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I mentioned it before, but the 5 hour Sunny, I think that was like what was on the ticket. It's like
like
Sunny
open to
plays doors.
close.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
sorry. It was a 5 hour Skrillex set at Red Rocks. I mean, one of the 10 best sets I've probably ever seen in my life. But
Yeah.
for him, especially, I've seen him quite a lot, seen him a few times this year. That one felt like we got the full experience of an artist that has, the 15-year catalog and, has the versatility, but like knew how to put it in a set that made sense. Like when he opened up,
Mm-hmm.
he was in the middle of the crowd, it was daytime, and this dude was playing like piano Studio Ghibli covers. Like he started as low as you could go
Mm-hmm.
in just vibes and energy, and just like there's like vibrations, and it just like slowly went up.
Mm.
And then by like 11 o'clock, he was playing like, you know, he was playing Scary Monsters and Nice Sprites and just going straight. And it was really impressive to see an artist putting that out there, but like, 8,000-9,000 people feeding it back. Like we've
Mm-hmm.
all needed this, and it was cool. I I do feel like a lot of legacy acts can go up there and really just do anything and
Mm.
I think kind of get away with it.
Yeah. But I will say I
So,
don't think a lot of legacy acts like even approach an opportunity like that in that way. Like I do think obviously the legacy acts are still out there and like playing shows, but for Skrillex to like almost take the challenge of doing like an open to close, like he doesn't need to do that. Like he
no.
can literally just show up for a festival headliner set and people will still be really excited, as I was, to see him at Portola. But it's cool that he's willing to be like, hey, like I'm still a DJ, still enjoy like challenging myself to like create a set that flows for 5 hours and be
Right.
able to like take a crowd that's maybe expecting the big hits and have them also be like, "Oh, that was cool," like the more ambient, chill stuff, and that's
Yeah.
cool, yeah.
Yeah, it was impressive. It was someone who obviously knows music really well, especially their music, but
Yeah.
you got to imagine it's like he's got the J Balvin stuff, he's got the Quest for Fire stuff, he's
Mhm.
got Jack U stuff,
Yep.
and every sonic palette that he's had over the years, is its own like you have to go through these different journeys. It's like being on a ride at Disneyland.
Yeah.
There's gonna be like different in a dark ride. You're gonna go into these different worlds. And at one point it's gonna hit this fever pitch, and then you
Yeah.
kind of come back down at the end. And that's kind of what he
Yes.
did. Then he had like more of the sing-alongs at the end. Honestly, I don't know like if a 4 or 5 hour set is something that I would really be interested in watching most artists do, because it's
Right.
like I just think that you're probably on a sick one, getting a nice body buzz and like listening to like a repetitive house kind of
Yeah.
set.
Yeah.
That's what I'm thinking when someone's DJing for 5 hours.
Mhm.
So to do it with like vocals and like just be it's cool.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I would want to see another 5 hour set from an artist. But I'm glad I had that experience.
But at the same time, now maybe it like hopefully will inspire artists to be able to look at like something you said earlier was being able to treat a set and like be able to almost like treat it like its own art, right? Like building a set is its own art in a way. So who knows? Like maybe that's inspiration for artists who would typically only do an hour, 2 hours max to be like, wait, what could I do with a 5 hour set? Like
Yeah.
what would be able to capture people's attention for that long?
Well, one of the things Wookie said is that he felt like an hour, 90 minutes is like not enough sometimes, like that they
Yeah.
could do more. But then I start to wonder if like I don't know, like is that what people even want? Yeah,
It's interesting, right?
I I feel like people's attention spans are not great,
I
you
think
know.
well that's what I think I'm saying is like I think it would be extra challenging for the artist to be able to do it, right? And to commit
Yeah.
to being it. Because I think you're right. I think it's like an hour feels like the easiest commitment for like a festival goer. You're like, an hour, no worries. I'll do that for sure. But like 5 hours, like how are you going to keep someone sitting there the whole time? Like,
Well, yeah, and like even Fred again, the night we went, you know,
mhm,
I felt like it
the
was kind of
shows in LA.
abrupt.
Yeah.
But then I thought someone was like, "Oh, he went till so and so last night." And
Mhm.
then I don't know if that was true or not, but it would have been a like 30 or 40 minute longer set. And
Mm.
it felt like maybe because I had that expectation that it was going to be that long and it was not that long. You know, it's just like maybe it was just a rumor going around.
Yeah, well, I think specifically for that show, I mean, I have a lot of thoughts about that show because I think the context of it is I feel like I've been a Fredigan fan for a really long time, and I do feel like that show had some interesting like pacing, but I also wonder if that's maybe just an example of like we forget that he's a really new artist in many ways. Like obviously he's a very like talented producer who has had a ton of producer credits, so he's not a stranger to making really good music. But I think putting on an actual show that is just his show, that's not a festival set, is very new in many ways for him. So my personal thought for that was it was interesting to see someone who technically is like very masterful with his music then be challenged by like, oh, what is your show set going to be and how is it going to flow and can you keep people's attention for that long? And I think both of
Right.
us had some thoughts about like it definitely was a good show. I think production wise, there was a lot of good thought put into it. But again, I think that's just another, like you were saying, like an artist looking at their own set in that way can be its own new challenge.
Totally. And I mean, let's compare that to a show that you came to, which I was happy that you were able to see, you
Mm,
know, ISO and Knock 2.
yeah.
So ISO Knock did the same room, right?
In the Shrine in LA.
Shrine. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Multiple nights
multiple
also.
nights.
Hmm.
And, you know, what they did was extremely ambitious. They did two headline shows back to back. One was the Room 202 finale set, and then ISO XO's Kids Gone Mad like debut set.
Mm.
So they did two headline, essentially 75-minute sets back to back with then a 30-minute back to back of them two at the end. So you got a 3-hour show, which,
Hmm.
by the way, had insane production, incredible like cues. ISO jumped out of the crowd in a toaster, like into the air.
Not an actual toaster
Yeah, but
for
that's
those
what they
listening.
called it
It's
the
when you pop
toaster.
out of the
He
bottom of the
popped out
stage,
of the
kind of.
bottom,
Yeah.
exactly, like a Pop
Now I'm
Tart.
imagining him actually coming out of a toaster.
He's just nice and warm. Fireworks, pyro, cryo. It was
Hmm.
like it was.
It was a show.
I think that was the epitome of the excellence of like the American production
Mm.
of electronic music events. But also, this is again going back to the article. This is what some people don't like about where electronic music is head. I think it's a net positive that we're getting like people, especially these two kids who are young people who are in their early 20s,
Mm.
who can dial in that kind of experience where like people are not going to be bored at all for 3 hours. You know, I
Yeah.
think that in itself is a feat.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's a tremendous amount of time and resources and manpower, human power that went into it. There's like
Hmm.
40, 50 people working on this thing. But I think that's the standard that headliners need to uphold for themselves going into the future because in this competitive, oversaturated landscape, I mean, that's what it's going to require, I think, and to justify the ticket price.
Yeah, for sure. Yes, I think the last part of what you said also that is a kind of an underlying thing that maybe people don't realize is also like there's a lot happening there that again requires effort and a level of showmanship to be able to justify not only keeping people's attention span but also spending a very decent amount of money on to buy a ticket. So,
Yeah.
I think you're right. I think there are definitely a case of artists that did a really amazing job and probably are going to be doing some very exciting stuff in the coming year. Definitely like a high level of artistry there, which is cool. I think that's good because I do think like one of our other recent Val Chat episode topics was talking about like headliners and like are we kind of losing big headliners? And while I don't think Knock 2 and ISOXO are like, going to be the next Taylor Swift by any means, I do think like it's exciting to see artists that represent dance music also be like, wow, they are really putting effort in the way that a pop star would to their early shows.
Totally. I
Yeah.
mean, the last thing I'll say on that is that because I've been there since the very beginning of those two artists' careers, I said it last year. I'm like, these two kids are going to be two of the biggest DJs in America, you know, and I'm not just saying things like that. You know, you can just see they have like an X factor or a certain thing that artists I think need to elevate to that level, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not, and I see other artists that have it too, but they have to be able to like within their own of their own volition tap into their work ethic, tap into their it has to all come together in that way, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's something that hopefully because they raised the bar the same way that like back in the day when Daft Punk came out with the pyramid, it made everyone in the industry say, damn, I need to like come correct with like my show. It's got to have that.
Yeah.
And then we kind of went away from it, like we talked about. Now we're kind of like we're going down on the production a little bit. We want to be in a 360 capacity. We want to be more with the people.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe it'll evolve in another way where it just becomes more abstract and it becomes more, you know, like theatrical or
Yeah.
interesting. You know, I think Fred again was more in that way where
Mm-hmm.
it was like it did feel experimental
Yeah.
on a grand scale, you
Yes.
know.
Yeah.
So I'd be
Yeah.
interested to see more of that. I want to ask real quick while we still have some time, like, what are some resolutions you got for next year? Because we got New Year's coming up and
I know.
2024 is coming up.
I know. Musical resolutions. I think for me, you know, we started the episode off kind of mentioning this, but I feel like for me, one thing that I hope to do more of is to just like dig a little further. I think I've definitely fallen into the times like what we're talking about, right? With like this feeling of like showmanship in artists and like people artists having to like fight for people's attention spans. Like I think that's just like by nature of like right now it's like TikTok is like the discovery tool that people use for finding new music. It's not SoundCloud anymore. So it's like you kind of have to make a spectacle and like a video in order to get people's attention or something. And I feel like I have found myself veering away from like taking the effort to like dig a little deeper and find new music and like interesting music. So that's something that I think for the coming year I hope to do more of because I do like, you know, there's so many interesting artists out there and I think we actually are at a higher level of music being made than ever before because it's like so accessible to learn how to produce good music.
Yeah.
So it's out there. I think it just takes a little effort. And to be honest, I definitely could see myself needing to do that a little bit more. So,
Totally.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that's great. There's a lot of tools at your disposal to discover new music.
Mm-hmm.
And we were just on Hannah Rad's holiday charity stream, and
Mm-hmm.
they were asking us how to discover music. I'd given some examples, like there's TikTok accounts that are just like beats from the 90s that have no business being this good, part 34. And honestly, I'll see one of those and I'll be like, damn, like I'll go to Spotify immediately,
Yeah.
start, you know, favoriting stuff. But you know, also doing it for new music, I think is
Yeah.
important.
Because, yeah, you said that before is that you actually probably discovered more new, but actually old music this year,
Yeah.
right? Like you were
Yeah.
digging in the opposite direction.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of it is because everything is so derivative. Like
Yeah.
one example is like I really like vaporwave music
Mm.
and I like internet music that samples a bygone era but like makes it sort of aesthetically interesting. Um and then after a while I just started to be like, well, I kind of just want to go and listen to the samples. And then when I
Yeah.
started listening to samples, I started creating playlists and then now the algorithm is feeding me new music that I haven't discovered from the 80s.
Wow.
And I almost kind of am in my own silo when it comes to discovery. I live with old music more for
Mm.
that reason. Because then when I go back to listen to things like, you know, lo-fi, hip hop, or funk, or like some of these like other genres that are in that same category,
Yeah.
I just hear the same samples being used all the time. Disco house,
Mm.
even a lot of like the regular house music that's being produced is just again, it's using samples from a bygone era,
Yeah.
and I almost just like the old music, like the source material better. And that source material a lot of times was inspired by something else.
Yeah.
So you can go back even further. So
Yeah.
I had mentioned to you that on my Spotify Wrap, my number 2 artist was an artist by the name of Masayoshi Takanaka, who is a very prolific fusion jazz and city pop jazz guitarist
Yeah.
from Japan in the 80s. He's 70 years old now.
Amazing.
But that
That's
was
your
my number
number
2
two.
artist under Skrillex because and you know, honestly, the only reason why Skrillex was number 1 is because he had so much material and I
Yeah.
listened to the albums a couple times.
Mm-hmm.
But like, I don't think my Spotify, it's way more like individualized songs than it is like the
Mm.
artists themselves. But I did listen to this one specific Japanese artist a lot. And I was like, damn, I just discovered this year through YouTube. And yeah, it's cool, but then you can just get too much in your comfort zone, right?
Yeah, but I will say I think that's really interesting and hopefully actually inspiring to I don't know if people are out there listening because I think that's cool that you were discovering music even if it was in the other direction going older music because I do think that's something that's maybe overlooked nowadays like because there's so much new music coming out that like and a lot of the younger kids maybe don't even know like the history of samples or how samples even work sometimes when they hear these songs that are literally like almost like edits of old songs. They're just like, "Oh, that's what it sounds like." And you're like, "No, there's actually like a lot of history there."
Yeah.
That's cool. Maybe go do that.
And then also like, on that topic, like my favorite artist maybe right now isn't on Spotify.
Mm,
So,
deep cut.
yeah.
Very hipster of you.
Well, it is another Japanese artist, Tatsuro Yamashita. I mean, his catalog is not on Spotify. He's
Oh
one of the
gosh.
greatest. He's one of the greatest, pop artists of the 1980s, and longer than that, but from Japan. And that's one of the drawbacks of
Mm,
relying too heavily on the DSPs. Hey, maybe
true.
5 years from now, we have a similar thing that happened in visual media,
Mm.
and the people that own the catalogs want to have their own streaming services a la carte.
Hmm.
So now you got to have 5 audio streaming services if you want to listen to the Sony stuff or if you want to listen to the
No, don't even
Universal.
say that.
I'm just
Don't even wish
saying.
that upon us.
I'm just saying
It's a dark
in my
future.
opinion, I think it's kind of, I don't want to say destroyed Hollywood, but it's definitely made things less important.
Mm,
And I don't know if it's going to happen to music, but something to keep in mind.
interesting.
Now, that's why I think that for me in 2024, my resolution would be get
Yeah.
outside my comfort zone.
Okay. That's a
And
good
I
one.
think that also extends to like, I'm just going to go to more shows that aren't electronic music.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I think, yeah, that's always it's always informative and interesting. Like I've always loved whether it's going to shows or just like learning about how different genres work, both in like fandoms and artists and whatever. But I do feel like it makes you learn and appreciate things about dance music culture that are unique to us.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I agree with that. I like
Well,
that.
2023 has been a great year.
It
It's
has been a
definitely been
great
a lot
year.
of transition.
Yes. That's a
Um,
good way to put it, honestly.
yeah. I won't say it was a good year. Like I think that there's been more good than bad.
I agree.
But a lot of transitional stuff. I still don't know how I feel about a lot of things. I think this
Mm.
podcast has been good, I guess, maybe venting in real time. But hopefully next year is a little bit more solidified. I think that's also kind of elusive to hope that things are going to be more solid.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree in that this year for sure was a transitional year. I think that if anything, what we're taking from it, I feel like we can all agree on what we started the episode talking about that like people are interested in dance music, however you define it. There's many ways you can define what dance music is, but people are interested in it. These waves always happen where it's exciting when there's that much attention on it, but that attention also brings some silly negative things. But those of us who really enjoy the music and the culture that surrounds it, like we know we're here to stay. So it's just going to be about seeing what comes next. And I do think like the positives are we have some really like innovative producers and music makers who have a lot of like abilities now. And with the excitement and interest on the mainstream level, like hopefully the events side of things will also reciprocate and take on the responsibility of like bringing on artists that deserve it and maybe taking some chances and bringing up some people that aren't like the obvious names that you could book. And I think if that is true, we'll see some exciting moments for 2024. But I think overall, I think I'm excited. I
Yeah.
think I'm hopeful.
No, me too. And I'm just really glad, at least because we're kind of wrapping up this first iteration of all this noise. I'm so glad that a lot of the goals that we had, we pretty much nailed all of them.
Yeah.
So I'm stoked on that. Even
Yes.
stuff like I want to get A-Track on here.
Yeah. Which we did.
We want to do an episode pretty much every week.
Which we did.
I mean, last week we didn't do an episode, but that's because I said we were on the holiday stream. So
Yeah, exactly. We're back and we had to wrap it up with one little end of the year episode.
totally. But yeah, thank you so much for like just this whole experience this year has been awesome.
Yes.
And I think next year will be good.
More to come
More to
from us here at All This Noise. We're going to interview some more fun people and have more discussions like this. And I'm just glad we have this place to do that.
Totally. We're going to take a little holiday break. Hope you guys have a great holiday season as well.
We'll see you in 2024. Thanks to Jose, our producer.
Yes.
Icon Collective, our home of All This Noise.
Ho, ho, Jose.
And all of you for listening. Thank you so much. We love you guys.
Take care.